Welcome to Professor Game Podcast, where we interview successful practitioners of games, gamification, and game thinking who brings the best of their experiences to get ideas, insights, and inspiration that help us in the process of getting the students to learn what we teach. And I'm Rob Alvarez. I teach and work at IE Business School in Madrid, where we create interactive and engaging learning materials. Want to know more? Go to professorgame.com/subscribe, start on our email list, and ask me anything. So, hello engagers, welcome back, because today we have another of our Greek friends, not too many of them that I've met before, but today we have Antonis. So Antonis, are you prepared to engage?
I was born prepared to engage, my friend.
Let's do this, because Antonis Triantafyllakis, is that the right pronunciation?
That is the story of my life. My surname has been the hardest thing to share with people that I hope care. Triantafyllakis is the right way to pronounce it, but please don't bother.
Triantafyllakis, there you go. Not too bad. Not too bad. I wasn't so far away, I have to say. I have to pat myself on the back.
Yeah.
And we have Antonis today because he's a soft skills trainer, facilitator, and consultant who combines experiential learning with gamification to ensure a holistic, playful, and impactful approach to capacity building, which is adaptable to the learner's needs. So is there anything we're missing out from that intro, Antonis, that you'd like to mention?
No, because I wrote it.
There you go. Fantastic. So Antonis, let's get started, because we want to know, what does a regular day, week, or, what does it feel like to be Antonis in a day, like whichever day that could be?
Right. Well, I would describe my life as a constantly in transition. And what I would describe my average day as would be weird, because every day is kind of different. And my day routine, if you want to call it that, although I hate the word routine, which probably gives you a hint for what I'm about to say, is that it really depends on what projects I am engaged into at the moment and what location that project is in. Because I really enjoy traveling. It's my favorite game is traveling. So
point collecting in airlines as well, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, let's say experience collecting rather than point collecting. So yeah, my day depends on where I am and what I have to do where I am. I really like to take a lot of projects that have to do with engaging with different communities and fulfilling different goals and people learning something different. So my average day would be, wake up at a random place at a random time, have a shower, drink some water, and jump into the day's obligations or tasks that I have to fulfill.
That sounds great. Sounds exciting. So we always dig right in right after this question, because we really like to know one thing, which is stories, and the other thing, which is fails or first attempts in learning. So Antonis, can you give us a story of a time when, again, you set out to do something and it was either spectacular or at least very interesting for you and full of learning, or something came up? A story of that fail, that first attempt in learning that maybe even led to future success. Do you have a story you can tell us?
One that I can say is that because about a year ago, I made the big decision to move to Berlin to have a permanent address somewhere, and that was in the transition that I tried to make to combine or jump from almost exclusively volunteering for international youth work to also work for the private sector and try to make a living out of what I discovered I love doing, which is helping people develop skills. And gamification came along the way on that. So one failure that I could mention here is that at one point after moving, I decided to focus on HR managers when it comes to the private sector, because I felt the skills that I could develop and I could apply gamification and training too were more related to human resource management. What I discovered in practice is that this was kind of a wrong decision, because HR managers, at least in Berlin, don't really have decision-making power of participating into training events and courses and being able to pay for that, because it's usually a C-level manager that decides for them and decides that, hey, you push my employees to attend this course because I decided that this is what is needed, which is counterintuitive when it comes to companies being productive, as far as I'm concerned. But that's the way the game is played here. So it was a wrong decision to focus on this target group. And once I started focusing on different target groups, let's say, I started gaining more success, although I'm still on the way of being successful in that regard.
And I'm guessing as well that there was a lot of gamification involved in those trainings. So what would you say, Antonis, because I'm guessing that this was some sort of pivot or iteration that you did here. What would you say was a key lesson for you? Something that you learned and you would tell your past self, like maybe not exactly do this, but if you could give a general advice, like a generalizable concept, what would you say your past self or somebody who's going through something maybe similar?
Analyze your target group. Make sure that you're focusing on the right target group for what you're trying to achieve. Because if you have clarified goals and then you decide on a target group that you assume will be relevant to those goals, and then you end up like I did, realizing in practice that it's not, then I could have probably avoided that if I could have done more research on what exactly are the tasks of this target group, what are they supposed to do in their everyday lives or jobs, and how what I can offer is related to that. Because if I've done so, I could have probably avoided some failures in that regard, and I've chosen a different target group earlier on.
That makes sense. I just have a follow up to this, because it's easy to think sometimes. Well, to think, of course, when you're in the weeds, you're there in the middle of the whole situation. It's not so easy. But thinking back, you say, well, I could have analyzed more. But there's also it's a tension between analyzing too much and analyzing too little. Like, would you have any advice for people who are in that situation? How do you gauge what is maybe too much, or maybe how you realize it was too little? Do you have any quick tip or advice on that side?
I would give myself a time limitation, so set a specific deadline, and after which I will just jump on and do it, even if I'm not certain. Because if we're waiting for the perfect moment to take an action, then we will never take that action. There is no such thing as a perfect moment. So analyze up to the point that it makes sense. And if I see myself, I'm looping again and again to the same arguments, and I've reached my deadline, then that's it. I've done my analysis. I'll go for it. And if it works, then it works. If not, a lesson for a new day.
Test it against some actual real action. That makes a lot of sense to me as well. So that was a great story. And Antonis, we would like also to get into another story. And this time of a story actually of success, because we're not just about failure or fails. We also like to see what happens with success. So do you have a story related, of course, to gamification or gameful attitude and similar, where, you said you had this objective, you wanted to achieve something, and you actually did? And maybe we'll draw some conclusions from that as well.
So from the professional failure, I will switch to a personal success. One thing that troubles, pretty much everyone I know, is to develop the habits that you desire to develop in your life, especially regarding healthy living and a healthy attitude towards work-life balance and all that. So one thing that I managed to do at a quite successful level, although there's always the enemy of the what's the saying? The enemy of the perfect is the enemy of better. So there's always room for improvement. But one thing that I managed to do successfully is to get myself into the diet that I want to choose, to have a regular workout schedule, to drink enough water per day, etc., to develop healthy habits. And the way I did it is actually by gamifying my habits. So I connected my to-do list to a passive gamification application called Loresum. So I would be getting points every time I would fulfill a task that I've set for myself. And I've set up some regenerative tasks, which means if I fulfill it, then it appears again, either instantly or the next day. So that would be for custom habits that I want to develop, or things that I want to do every day. So that's actually, I managed to be motivated and to keep consistency in my own my own goals for myself. So that I can call it a success, and I can recommend it to everyone to gamify your life. That's the best thing you can do.
So you can, and you used the support of an app as well. That I think that one of the relevant things here is to keep yourself not only motivated, the app like helps on that, but also like what do you put there? What do you not put there? How do you keep yourself accountable as well for putting it there? It's an interesting world. I think there's a lot to do there. I know I tested out the app Habitica. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Habitica or Habitica or something like that. It's pretty cool, actually. With the Octalis group, I did part of we did an analysis on how the app works and how it can be improved. It's a very interesting one. I haven't tested the one that you mentioned, and I do think there's a lot of interesting stuff that can be gained from that. And would you say, like, would you attribute or at least a large part of your success to using the app? Maybe, any secret, sort of, so to speak, that you can give us of how you did it and how you managed to do it successfully? Because I'm sure many users, log in, register, do it for a day or two, and then, just lose motivation or whatever that could be.
Yeah, the key secret is because I've tried Habitica since before it was named Habitica. The problem that I found is, even though it's a really amazing application, is that I realized that there is a difference between applications like that, which you have to put a lot of effort into designing your own game and designing your tasks and creating an entire strategy, which is extra effort, and applications like your average fitness tracker, for example, which does this passively. You don't have to put extra effort on top of the effort you're putting for fulfilling the task. And passive gamification on an application that is intending to assist you into a positive habit creation, I think is one key secret to not have to put extra effort on top of the effort that I'm putting for my task into this application. So the reason I liked this application, it actually ended up being a way that led to this success, is exactly that. And it's good for passive gamification. So I already have my to-do list on another application that is linked. So basically, I get extra points, and there is an existing lore, and there is an existing structure that I don't have to define myself. I just watch, and it develops the way I develop my tasks. I perform my tasks, and it just works on its own without me having to put the extra effort. So this is, I think, the key secret that I can take away from it.
Interesting. I would actually, I was, what you were talking, and I was imagining a game I'm playing right now on the PlayStation is a Batman Arkham Knight. And I was thinking, like, well, imagine you're doing your fight with whatever, enemies you're facing. And then you also have to go ahead and like pause or something and go ahead and record the points, the moves that you did, the ones you didn't do. Like it stops being, I mean, there is a big difference between just doing what you're doing and that being recorded, and you having to do the recording itself as well. It's almost like not only designing the game at the start, but also, leading the game in every single point. So I think there you have a very interesting point there in how much we do already for our players, because it's probably, again, I don't know about the app, but it's probably already sort of designed for just a specific group of users. One thing that maybe Habitica also tries to do is the fact that it's trying to be for almost everybody. Maybe that could be part of the thing. Like it could be used in so many ways that maybe it's harder to see how I would use it in my, my objectives. That could be a key lesson there, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm not downplaying Habitica at all. It's an amazing application.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just that for me, this is the problem, that I have to create my entire thing first, and then I will have to gain any kind of success. While in a simpler application, it's just there. Like you said, with a game, you don't have to record your own success. It's just there. It takes more effort from the designer's point of view, though. I say it in practice when I am applying gamification into learning, is that I have to put twice the effort as a trainer, learning designer, whatever you want to call it, myself, in order to create the right structure where the participants will be feeling like they're playing. It's exactly that they don't have to put any extra effort. They get anything that I have to give them, they get them directly after fulfilling a task. So that's a key point.
And it brings us back to something that I've mentioned, I think, quite a few times before. And I would argue that this is a design. This is a design in general, gamification and game-based learning and all these things related to games. You have to see it from the design perspective because you're designing for somebody. And talking about designs, do you have some sort of process, some sort of structure when you're going to design one of these solutions? How do you do it? What's your mental process? How do you structure this, or don't you structure it, which could be the case as well? Can you run us through that way that you do things?
The main thing that I start with is clarifying the goals that I want to achieve. So writing down very, very clearly and very, very specifically what at the end of the whole game or course or process the participants will have gained. So what skills they will develop, what new pieces of knowledge they would have gained, the things that I want very clarified and very narrowed down to specifics, what they will have achieved. And then I basically reverse engineer from the needs assessment that I have done beforehand to the goals that I want them to achieve at the end. What are the necessary steps? And then I break it down to the 4 stages of gamification of a game. Discovery, onboarding, scaffolding, end game. So I break it down into those stages, and I see at each stage what do I want them to have achieved, and I try to juxtapose because I usually do it in residential workshops. I gather teams of people and I develop a training course for them. So actions in order for them to develop a skill. So I basically juxtapose the 4 stages of a game to the 4 stages of experiential learning because there is a very, very clear correlation. So I try to see every action that they have to take on each stage. Does it actually fit in this fit the goals that I've set and the stage of experiential learning that they're in? So this is how I design it.
Absolutely, and it makes sense as well. It's very interesting because you're as we do in gamification, game-based learning, all these things, you're taking from that experience that games already have, and that's, I think, one of the powers of doing this in this day and age. You're taking all of that understanding that we have from games and you're applying it to something else, which in this case is training and upskilling and so on. So I just have a quick question. This applies even to it because the 4 stages, usually many people see them as, sort of a long process. Like this is, the onboarding and that could be, maybe the first day, and then, scaffolding and so on could be maybe a week. Does this also apply in your case, at least, to a 1-day or maybe even 2-day workshop?
I apply it to everything from a 1-hour workshop to a full week course. And I apply it because it makes sense in the in cognitive terms. So it makes sense in the way people learn. So I try to apply it as much as possible. But then that leads me to another point. Your question leads me to this other point that many people, both in the nonprofit sector, which I have more experience, and in the for-profit sector, try to fit in too much information into too little time. So they end up basically overcrowding every part of their session or course with too much information, and they think that's learning. But it's not learning. Unless you actually perform an action that requires you to use the knowledge that you've gained, then you haven't really learned it. So if I see, even if it's a beautifully made PowerPoint presentation with a lot of information on a slide, that doesn't mean I've learned what I see there. I need to actually perform some action. So it's very important to narrow down what pieces of knowledge and what skills you intend to develop into what is actually realistic to fit into the time that you have given. And it's always a wise decision to put less.
Yes, it does. And that makes a lot of sense. Just a quick break before we continue. Are you enjoying this podcast? If you're listening through a podcasting app, please subscribe and rate us on the app. This will be of great help to reach more engagers so we can change the world together through gamification. So, Antonis, we always like to get into other kinds of topics as well. And we have this question about sort of best practices or an element, an idea, strategy that you think that almost any gamification, game-based learning would benefit from. Like, is there, again, not a silver bullet, but something that you would say, well, if you think about it this way, or if you do these things, usually this will improve or make your project even fantastic. Do you have such an element?
Yeah, and I will try in this quick questions round to think completely out of the box because I like doing that. So I will give answers that may be seemingly unrelated. And my first answer then would be impact. Consider the impact of the course or the action or the game. What is the social impact that you're achieving? How are your learners or your players getting better, becoming better after this?
Very interesting. And that way, of course, you see what your objective is about. And there you have all this whole reflection that is very, very impactful in the end. Mm-hmm. So after listening to these questions, to the whole vibe of the podcast, I know you've listened as well before. Is there anybody that comes to your mind, somebody that you would like to listen to and probably hasn't been yet in Professor Game?
Yeah, I was thinking, again, out of the box, Ken Robinson had this incredible and the most popular, more than a decade later, TED Talk about how schools kill creativity. And I'll be interested. What does Ken Robinson think now about gamification, now that it's becoming a trend and it's just started to enter the field of learning and education? I'll be really interested to see what he thinks.
Interesting. So, Anton is in the same realm of recommendations. Is there any book that you would recommend to the engagers, and why would you recommend that book?
Yeah, I had in mind a book called Ishmael by Daniel Quinn, and that's a philosophical novel from the 90s. The reason I like it, even though it's not directly related to gamification, is that it helps people breaking down the assumptions that they may have and the social biases and the cultural biases through a form of a Socratic conversation that the main character is having. The reason I recommend that is that gamification requires a lot of thinking outside of the box. So this book is one of the best and the most extreme that I've seen in existential terms, achieving this thinking out of the box.
Outside the box. I think that pretty much defines what gamification is all about. Yep. So talking about recommendations, sort of a recommendation, as I would like to know, what is your favorite game?
Yeah, I always find trouble answering that question because I have many and I change my mind every now and again. But I would point out to the board game called Dixit because it's super simple and it's replayable infinite times because the game basically is different according to who is playing it. It has to do with interpretations of images, basically. So if played with a different group, you have a completely different game. And because it has really, really nice illustrations on the cards that are used, it's also a very, very frequently used deck of cards for trainers, although they don't play the game necessarily, but they use the cards, again, for interpretation.
Interesting. We had never had that recommendation, and it's certainly a very interesting game. And talking about games once again, what would you say in gamification, what would you say is your superpower? That thing that you do better or best at, probably than others or than the general public at least?
Experiential learning. I have a lot of experience coming mostly from the nonprofit sector, the youth work sector, as a trainer. So that came before gamification. And then I realized, I used to actually play games and I used to do this and this and that. Now I can combine all of them and I can combine the two. So I would say my superpower is exactly that, combining gamification with experiential learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to be very fair as well, I think in general, gamification, game-based learning tends to be, it's not a requisite necessarily, but I would argue that it definitely tends to be very experiential as well. So now we're getting to the random question that comes from the audience. So let's take a look at what comes out this time. Okay, so this question comes from Eva Den Heyer. So Eva, you're going to get your answer, or Eva, you're going to get your answer today from Antonis. The question from Eva is, how can you stimulate playfulness with your players? And she has comments. Often I see people playing games with a gaming mindset, problem-solving, focused, and determined. But I would like to see more of the playing mindset, exploring, imagination, without boundaries, etc. What would be your thoughts, your comments on that, Antonis?
The first thought that came to mind is allow the players to explore. Many people, even in game design, many designers forget the explorer type of player. They focus a lot on the achiever, the killer, the person that wants to, kill the monsters and get the experience points, and that's it. I would focus on that, on exploring, creating a lot of suitable and aesthetically pleasing environment around the player, the learner, or whatever you want to call the action taker, that they will basically just discover their own answers just because the environment enables them to.
Absolutely. Giving a lot of choice, giving a lot of possibilities, giving a lot of possibilities to explore. Again, this could mean, a 3D, super beautiful adventure that is super complex to program, but there's other possibilities to explore. You can think about it as, for example, when you have an RPG, you're asking people essentially what to do. Of course, if it's digital, you have to restrict it to what the possibilities are. But the more possibilities you give, and the more different, again, as you mentioned, not only on slaying the monsters, but also exploring around and seeing what is available. The more you provide for that, the more open the space can be, and the less boundaries you will have. Boundaries exist, and they have to exist, because otherwise we go just into the terrain of play and we get out of games and gamification. But the larger the range of things that you can provide, I would also argue that the more you have space for all that creativity, for all that playfulness, that to be born there. But of course, always remember, and this is my side of the advice, remember what your objective is, what you want them to do, to be able to achieve. And keep that in mind. I'm not saying just tunnel vision people through something, one small thing, and the rest forget about it. But do keep that in mind, because otherwise you will have people just exploring around and not achieving whatever it is that you want them to achieve, which is, in the case of learning, they have to, or you want them to be able to learn something, whatever that could mean.
Yeah, of course. It's just that you have your clearly defined objectives. And if you leave space for people to discover their own answers as well, then you're basically enforcing those objectives by the extra knowledge that is only fitting to the people that are discovering it.
Absolutely. So, Antonis, before we take off, do you have any final piece of advice? If you do, please let us know. And then, of course, let us know where we can find you, how can we connect with Antonis in the world of the internet, social media, or whatever you want to lead us to.
Yeah, a quick advice is that, as we all know, gamification is about motivation. It's not literally about playing games, but it's about using the psychology of games to keep people motivated. And the way you play games is you play them. So for me, the biggest advice would be to discover the game by experience. Don't give all the things that you have to give on a plate. Let people do and focus on that. It's like I would finish with Confucius' famous line: I hear and I forget, I see and I remember, I do and I understand. So this is how people learn, by doing. And that would be my final advice.
Absolutely. And where can we find you, Antonis?
You can find me on my webpage, mytrainer.cc. You can find my email there as well. And you can find me on LinkedIn with my super long name, or by LinkedIn/it's Antonis. So that's easier. But you will provide the links on the relevant posts on your page anyway.
Absolutely. So if you type in Professor Game, you type in the search bar, you type Antonis, that will definitely lead you to this show notes. You will find all the links to the webpage, to the LinkedIn profile, and you will be able to spell the last name when you see it there on the screen.
That's a game. I should convert it to a game. Pronounce my name correct and you get a cookie or something. I don't know.
There you go. So thank you very much, Antonis. It was very nice to have this conversation. Lots of insights from your experience as well. However, for now, and at least for today, it is time to say that it's game over.
Game over indeed, then. See you in the next game.
Hey, Engagers, thank you for listening to this episode of the Professor Game Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our interview with Antonis. And do you have any questions like the ones that we asked today to Antonis? Anything you'd like to know? then all you have to do is go to professorgame.com/question and ask your question. If it is selected, it will come up in a future episode and you'll get your answer. And before you go on to your next mission, would you like to know about the next episode of the Professor Game podcast? Well, then subscribe using your favorite podcast app and listen to the next episode of Professor Game. I will see you there.